Okay, so we are at 10:01, so let's get started. Aloha, and thank you for joining us today for the BSA training for CEO and board members. My name is Sayaka James, Education and Training Director at the Hawaii Credit Union League. Joining us also is our Compliance Officer, Eugene Davis. A quick housekeeping items before we get started. Today's session is from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. with a short 10-minute break. Your audio will be muted automatically to minimize background noise during the presentation. By joining us today, you're consenting to be recorded. A copy of the recording will be available on our website at hcul.org under Professional Development at a later date. To help us track participation, please edit your screen name to include your full name. If you're joining us as a group using one login, kindly send me a private message with the names of everyone attending. A training log will be sent to each credit union as confirmation of participation. If you'd like an individual certificate of completion, please email us and we'll be happy to arrange that for you. The email address to send your request will be in the Zoom chat. With that, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Eugene Davis, to introduce our instructors for today.
Thank you, Sayaka. Good morning, everyone. I am thrilled and delighted to introduce our two presenters this morning from Buckley Technology. First, I'll introduce Elizabeth Esposito. She joined Buckley Technology, or BTG, in 2014 and currently serves as Vice President of Professional Services. Elizabeth's area of expertise includes enterprise risk management with a specialized focus in IT and information security, business continuity, disaster recovery, vendor management, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, and BSA and AML. Elizabeth is responsible for the daily operations at BTG and managing client relationships. When not developing compliance and risk assessment programs, she manages the development for BTG's compliance software solution, Isaac Online, that's ISSAC. Elizabeth enjoys participating in speaking engagements and training seminars to help financial institutions with their compliance programs. Also joining Elizabeth from BTG is Jennifer McGee. She joined the group in 2016 and currently serves as the Senior Compliance Consultant. Jennifer consults within the areas of information security, business continuity, disaster recovery, BSA, AML, ACH, e-commerce, and vendor management. Prior to joining BTG, Jennifer was an integral part of operations and compliance functions at a community bank in Southern Connecticut. As a certified compliance officer, Jennifer aims to share practical compliance and risk assessment programs with clients and partner organizations. With that being said, I happily turn it over to Elizabeth and Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Sayaka. And thank you to the Hawaii Credit Union League for sponsoring this event. It definitely is a great opportunity to provide a training resource to our board members and executive management teams over at our Hawaii credit unions. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go through a high-level overview for the BSA training, which satisfies our annual requirement to complete training at a board and executive management level. So let's see, move through the slides here. Okay, so before we get started on the actual training content, we just wanted to go through some quick housekeeping information. So the training slides and on-demand recording of the live webinar will be made available by the League. Questions can be submitted using the Zoom chat feature. And once we are completed with this presentation, we will actually compile all of those questions and provide a Q&A sheet with our responses to all of the participants following the presentation. All attendees will also receive a short questionnaire to complete following this training presentation so that you can receive documentation that your training has been completed. So if you have any questions specific to that information, you can definitely feel free to reach out to the League and or Jen and I. But to get us going, so Eugene did a great job of introducing us, so thank you. I appreciate that. We will roll right into the first part of our training session. At this point, I am going to stop my video share so I can focus on the content of the presentation, if everyone is okay with that. So our training presentation today is within two parts. The first part for our learning objective will be to go through a BSA program overview. So we will be reviewing board of director responsibilities within the Bank Secrecy Act program, as well as compliance requirements that everyone should be aware of when directing and overseeing the program. Once we get through this first part of the training, we will take a quick 10-minute break, and then we will come back to some regulatory updates, some related guidance, pretty much information that everyone should have an awareness on as it relates to the BSA program. So an overview for board of director responsibilities. The board must understand BSA, AML, which is anti-money laundering, and OFAC regulatory requirements, including not just the compliance requirements to oversee and approve the BSA program, but also to understand any penalties and recent enforcement actions for noncompliance. So I did include the link directly to FinCEN's website, which will bring you to the most recent enforcement actions. It is always a great idea to periodically browse that website so that you are familiar with any recent enforcement actions that may affect other financial institutions. You can sort through to find maybe other credit unions, and this is a great resource and tool for you to review to see, okay, what are some of the weaknesses that the examiners are focusing on or the regulators are focusing on, and do those weaknesses apply to the credit union here? It is also important for the board to go through this training so that you can understand the threats that pose a risk to your credit union's overall BSA program and BSA compliance requirements. And ultimately, the responsibility for BSA compliance does fall to the board, which is why it's important that we go through this training requirement on an annual basis. So as far as an overview for BSA, for those who are new to sitting on a board, new to being part of executive management, we always like to go through and provide some historical information on really where the Bank Secrecy Act came from. So the Bank Secrecy Act was enacted in 1970. It was designed to help identify the source, volume, movement of currency, and other monetary instruments transported and transmitted into and out of the United States or deposited in financial institutions. Financial institutions under the BSA is required or are required to report cash transactions over $10,000 using the Currency Transaction Report, or CTR. We will definitely talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. That is also a requirement to report and identify persons conducting the transaction, as well as maintain appropriate records. So these are all requirements under the Bank Secrecy Act. Initially, the Bank Secrecy Act's purpose was to also allow law enforcement and other regulatory agencies to pursue investigations of criminal, tax, and regulatory violations, and also to provide documentation to prosecute money laundering and other financial crimes. Over the years, the Bank Secrecy Act and related regulations have definitely changed as far as purpose to now add in cybercrime as well as human trafficking and other threats, which we will also discuss within the second portion of today's training. So there are additional acts that were introduced as well to support what we consider to be the BSA umbrella. It includes the Money Laundering Control Act, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988, the Annunzio Wiley Anti-Money Laundering Act, the Money Laundering Suppression Act, Money Laundering and Financial Crimes Strategy Act, a biggie, which is the U.S. Patriot Act. We'll dive into that in a little bit, as well as the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. So we see that BSA initially started to prosecute tax crimes, money laundering, fraudulent financial transactions, and then it has since evolved to include anti-terrorism funding as well as cybercrime. So to dive a little bit into the U.S. Patriot Act of 2001, or what it stands for is the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools to Restrict and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. Definitely a lot easier to refer to this as the U.S. Patriot Act. But the Act did provide a few enhancements and big enhancements to the overall BSA program as well as requirements. So the Patriot Act did strengthen member identification procedures. It prohibited financial institutions from engaging in businesses with foreign shell banks. It does have a requirement to implement enhanced due diligence procedures when it comes to identifying your members and opening accounts. And it has greatly improved the information sharing between financial institutions and the U.S. government. So to give an overview of the anti-money laundering processes and give a little bit of a definition here, this is the criminal practice of processing illegally gained or dirty money to make it appear as if it's clean. So there's three steps involved in this process to launder money. The first is placement. So that's the method of getting funds into the financial system. It could include structuring your transactions. But once those funds are in the financial system, we then move to layering, which is the process of moving funds within a complex series of transactions. So they may, deposit the funds. Maybe they will withdraw it immediately at a different geographical area. But this is really to confuse the paper trail. And then finally, we get to the integration phase where it now appears as if these transactions were legal. So this is definitely a huge focus within the overall BSA program. We will go through some monitoring activities, some prevention methods as well, and also how this applies to the current threats and trends within your BSA program today. So now that we've gone through an overview of really the Bank Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering requirements, we want to go through what overall compliance requirements your credit unions must follow in order to not comply with the requirements, comply with the regulations, but also to avoid any weaknesses when it comes to exams, your independent testing, findings and recommendations. So it is definitely an oversight for the board of directors, especially executive management, to know what these compliance requirements are. This is going to take us a bit to go through because it is important that everyone has an awareness of some of the details involved within the requirements, as well as the internal controls needed to have an overall effective BSA program. So we consider this to be the 5 pillars of your BSA program foundation. And there are specific requirements that include a BSA compliance officer, then follows your internal policies, procedures, and internal controls. There is an enterprise-wide training requirement, an independent program testing requirement, and also the 5th pillar, which we consider to be customer due diligence, CDD, or member due diligence. So we're going to dive into each of these requirements to provide an awareness of what's included under each. And as I mentioned earlier, if there are any specific questions about any of these requirements, please feel free to utilize the chat feature, and we would be more than happy to answer those questions and dive deeper following the presentation. So moving right along into the first BSA compliance requirement. So a BSA compliance officer must be designated by the board and reappointed annually. So this is something where most of the credit unions we engage with do, in fact, designate a BSA compliance officer. One area of oversight that we typically find to be lacking is that the reappointment or the reapproval of that BSA compliance officer is often not performed on an annual basis. So that is a matter of, once your BSA policies go to the board for approval, at that time, your BSA compliance officer is also annually approved as well. So once that's captured within your meeting minutes, the credit union is fine and in compliance with that piece. The BSA compliance officer is overall granted the authority to develop and administer the BSA program for compliance and training. So the operational functions do fall within the oversight of your BSA compliance officer that you've designated. They should also be fully knowledgeable of BSA requirements and all related regulations. So while the board members, executive management, and credit union staff go through annual training, we do recommend enhanced training be provided to your BSA compliance officer. They may attend different webinars, different seminars specific to the overall BSA program, which will help them come back with maybe recommendations for new tools, systems, technologies to help monitor your overall BSA program. And then lastly, the board of directors and management team should receive regular updates from the BSA officer related to BSA compliance activities. So the frequency of those updates and reporting back to the board of directors is going to be based off of your credit union's risk profile and how complex your credit union's BSA program are. Some credit unions will have an annual report back to either their supervisory committee or directly to the board, reporting back on BSA activities such as the number of STAR reports that have been filed, CTR reports, unusual activities, suspicious transactions, or it would be, quarterly, semi-annually. The frequency of those updates, again, fall within the risk profile of your credit union. I would definitely say if you are not receiving reports from your BSA officer, compliance officer, that is definitely a recommendation to implement pretty much immediately. So moving into the BSA compliance requirement for internal policies, procedures, and controls, we're going to spend a little bit of time and break this apart because there are various controls in place that need to be implemented in order to have an effective BSA compliance program, as well as effective board oversight over your compliance requirements. So the board, again, is ultimately responsible for ensuring a written and effective BSA program is in place. That program should define internal controls and processes, which are specifically designed to limit those BSA risks. So it does have to include a CIP process, which is customer identification program, as well as suspicious activity monitoring and reporting. So we will break into each of those later on in the presentation. As I mentioned previously, the written BSA program should be reviewed at least annually by management and approved by the board and noted within the meeting minutes. Within your BSA policy and program, there will be that designation of who your BSA compliance officer is. So as long as you're reviewing this at least annually, you're also redesignating that BSA officer annually. So it doesn't need to be two separate processes. The controls also are meant to ensure all regulatory record keeping and reporting requirements are met. There are very specific requirements as it relates to reporting under the BSA. A risk-based member due diligence process has to be in place, and all reportable transactions must be accurately and timely filed. So we will define the currency transaction reports as well as the suspicious activity report, or CTRs and SARs, later on in the presentation. So getting into the first reporting requirement, which is the currency transaction reports, or CTRs. The credit union does have a requirement to file a CTR for each transaction in cash of more than $10,000. CTRs must be filed electronically with FinCEN within 15 days of the transaction date, and CTRs are required to be retained in hard copy or electronic form for at least 5 years from the date of the report. So We won't dive too much into how to complete a currency transaction report. We're definitely going to keep this at a high level for our board members and executive management team. But we do want to make sure that you have an awareness that there are exemptions to filing a CTR, which we call phase 1 exemption and phase 2 exemption. So we're going to dive into that, define that a bit more just from an awareness perspective. So the CTR phase 1 exemption, these are transactions that are conducted in currency or cash by the following, and these are exempt. These individuals or entities, are exempt from the reporting requirement. So that would include banks, financial institutions, governmental departments or agencies, any entity exercising governmental authority within the U.S., any listed public company, there are some exceptions to that, and subsidiaries of listed public companies. So these organizations, these entities, if the credit union conducts business with any of these, the credit union does not have a requirement to complete a CTR for the transactions conducted. So there is also the phase 2 exemption. So the phase 2 exemption includes transactions conducted by smaller businesses that will need to meet FinCEN's specific criteria. Non-listed businesses and payroll customers or payroll members are also or can be exempt from currency transaction reporting. So just to define what falls under a non-listed business per FinCEN's requirements, the non-listed business has to maintain a transaction account a transaction account with the credit union for at least, that should be 12 months, They frequently engage in currency transactions greater than $10,000. They are incorporated, organized, and registered to do business in the U.S. or state. So these businesses must not be considered high risk for money laundering. Any businesses that are considered high risk would be ineligible from the CTR exemption under phase 2 exemption, non-listed business. Additionally, ineligible non-listed businesses would include businesses that serve as financial institutions or agents of financial institutions. It includes the purchase or sale to customers of motor vehicles of any kind, vessels, aircraft, farm equipment, mobile homes. These would be businesses that practice law, accountancy, or medicine. They auction off goods. They charter or operate ships, buses, or aircrafts. These would include pawn brokerage shops and gaming of any kind other than licensed betting at racetracks. So any of these businesses we would consider to be high risk and or ineligible from the CTR phase 2 exemption. Additional businesses also include investment advisories or investment banking services, real estate brokerage, title insurance and real estate closings, trade union activities, and any other activities that may be specified by FinCEN as far as being ineligible for that phase 2 exemption. To define payroll customers. So payroll customers or members for your credit union may also be exempt from CTRs if they have maintained a transaction account at the credit union for at least 12 months. They frequently withdraw more than $10,000 in order to pay its U.S. employees in currency, and they are registered within the United States or state to conduct business. So as far as CTR exemption filing and review, the credit union must file a one-time designation of exempt person report or DOEP for either phase 1 or phase 2 exemptions through the BSA filing system within 30 days after the first transaction of currency. The designation of exempt person report is not necessary to file for banks, federal, state, or local governments, or entities exercising governmental authority. The credit union is required to review phase 1 and phase 2 exemptions at least annually. So that is a process, again, that's usually brought up by your BSA compliance officer. It's reviewed with the management team, and you're looking for pretty much a reason why they should continue to be exempt from the CTR filing if their requirements are met as far as they're continuing to conduct high dollar transactions and they are not considered to be a high risk or an eligible business from the CTR exemption. So moving into the second form of reporting, which is suspicious activity reports, again, we're going to keep this very high level as far as what the requirements are, not necessarily how you would complete a SAR. That would definitely be for the credit union staff training tomorrow. But SARs must be filed for the following transactions and activities. So if there is the suspicion of insider abuse in any amount, a SAR would need to be filed. If transactions aggregate $5,000 or more, when a suspect can be identified. Transactions aggravating $25,000 or more, regardless of if the potential suspect can be identified. Aggregating $5,000 or more when the credit union knows, suspects, or has reason to suspect that the transaction involves money laundering or other illegal activity. It is designed to avoid BSA regulations, or if there is suspicion that this is not the type of transaction that your member would normally conduct. Additionally, as BSA has evolved, suspicious activity reports are also utilized to report cyber events and cyber incidents, which we will talk about in the part 2 of this training later today. So there is specific requirements for the timeline to file your suspicious activity reports. So they should be filed within 30 days of detecting that suspicious activity. If no suspect can be identified, the timeline can be extended to 60 days. And it is very important that individuals on whom the credit union is filing that SAR on, they should not be informed of that filing. That is a specified requirement within the regulations. The SAR must be filed even if the suspicious activity takes place outside of the United States. And similar to the CTR, your SARs must be retained for 5 years from the date of filing. The number of SARs filed should be reported to the board. So again, this falls back on the BSA compliance officer and recognizing if that reporting process is currently in place. Additionally, depending on the activity, law enforcement should be notified even when a SAR is already filed or if it has not been filed yet, depending again on the activity and the suspicious transaction or incident involved. And the credit union should continue to file ongoing SARs every 90 days once the activity continues. So these are the requirements that your BSA compliance officer and your BSA operational staff are required to comply with. Part of the internal controls under the BSA compliance requirements includes information sharing. This is what we refer to as FinCEN 314A or 314B. So we're just going to quickly define what that means so that you have an awareness of this requirement for this safeguarding control. So FinCEN 314A are requests for information that are received every 2 weeks by the credit union. There is usually a designated individual, most likely this is your BSA compliance officer, that will receive this request. And the credit union is then required to search records for current and past accounts to identify any accounts and transactions of the named suspect. So FinCEN releases a list of individuals and or businesses that they are monitoring or sanctioned, and they would like information on whether or not your credit union has conducted transactions for that individual or entity in the past. Any report of positive matches to FinCEN must be reported within 14 days unless the request specifically includes a time frame. And information contained in FinCEN requests cannot be disclosed. So that's very important. If you do have a positive match, that stays internally at the credit union and reported directly to FinCEN. It does not fall back to this next part of information sharing, which is FinCEN 314B. So 314A includes information sharing directly with FinCEN. 314B is information sharing of BSA risk and threats and incidents voluntarily with other financial institutions. So under 314B, financial institutions can opt to voluntarily report activity that may involve terrorist activity or money laundering with other financial institutions. FinCEN must be notified of the credit union's intent to share and participate in 314B on an annual basis. And FinCEN does provide a list of other participating financial institutions. Now, the voluntary information sharing does not permit a financial institution to share a SAR that's been filed, disclose or deny the existence of a SAR, or disclose its intention to file a SAR. So again, that's very important requirements that your BSA compliance officer and BSA operational staff must follow if they choose to participate within 314B voluntary reporting. So 314A and 314B, this was initiated as part of the USA Patriot Act to establish those procedures to help deter money laundering and terrorist activity. So again, from a board oversight perspective, it's just an awareness for you to know that these are things that the credit union can participate in. One, they must participate in, which is 314A. That is a mandatory requirement. But 314B, if you wanted to enhance the overall BSA program and become aware of maybe some BSA threats or risk that could be within the credit union industry or even your geographical area, you can choose to participate in that information sharing with other financial institutions. So now we're going to get into OFAC. So OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets and Control. So under the BSA compliance requirements is where we typically find the OFAC screening process. OFAC is an office of the U.S. Treasury. So they were enacted to monitor foreign countries and regions, individuals and companies who are in direct conflict with U.S. foreign policy and our national security goals. So the sanctioned programs under OFAC requires financial institutions to block or reject transactions, accounts, and other assets for these individuals and or entities and countries and regions identified within OFAC's specially designated nationals or SDN system. So the credit union does have a requirement to complete OFAC screening for all new account holders, beneficial owners for your business accounts, all parties to a loan prior to loan disbursement. An OFAC screening would need to be completed for all parties to a wire, and also the sale of monetary instruments, which would be cashier's checks, etc. The credit unions must report all blocking and rejected transactions to OFAC within 10 business days of the occurrence. There is a requirement to report blocked and rejected transactions annually by September 30th. The information that would be captured in that report would be as of June 30th. So again, this is important for the board to have an awareness that this process and this control is in place to not only help us identify the members that are opening the accounts, but to continue to have that enhanced due diligence requirement satisfied and met to screen the individuals and entities doing business at the credit union. So the next internal control that we're going to discuss includes the BSA risk assessment. So a BSA risk assessment is required to be completed by the credit union, and it helps to identify and assess the products and services that pose a higher risk of money laundering, terrorist financing, and other BSA violations. The risk assessment also identifies and assesses any high risk or cash intensive member and business accounts. And it also assesses the geographic location in which the credit union operates within. So this would be the identification of if your branch locations are within high intensity drug trafficking areas or high intensity financial crime areas, and an assessment of how that impacts your overall BSA program. The BSA risk assessment is meant to evaluate the controls that are currently in place, evaluate the risk, if there are changes to that risk, and if additional controls need to be implemented. We have seen within the past 12 to 18 months that examiners are also looking for a trends analysis to be included within your BSA risk assessment. And that trends analysis will identify high-risk activities, which are dependent again on your credit union's risk profile. And those high-risk activities are assessed over a period of time to identify whether or not your risk exposure to money laundering or BSA violations may have changed. So what we've typically seen, and for credit unions who we engage with to perform BSA risk assessments, we will include within the past year, we will identify how many CTRs have been filed each month, how many SARs have been filed, if there are cybercrime incidents that prompted a SAR versus, the last 12-month period. So that trends analysis is basically a comparison of, has the credit union's activities remained stable, or have those specific high-risk activities increased? And once that assessment is completed, we can then identify if additional controls and monitoring processes are in place. So as I mentioned, this is definitely something that we're seeing on our end as far as the examiners specifically requesting a trends analysis be included within the BSA risk assessment process. So the BSA risk assessment is reviewed and updated at least annually, and the presentation is provided to management and the board of directors. So a BSA risk assessment does not need to be included internally. You can definitely utilize an outsourced consulting firm or engage with an audit firm to complete that BSA risk assessment. But it is important that that is reviewed for updates annually and presented back to you. Currently, as I mentioned, this is one of NCUA's most commented on weakness or lack of control when they've been conducting credit union exams within the past 12 to 18 months. So I would definitely say this is a point of priority to give some attention to and maybe update that BSA risk assessment process and format to meet those requirements. So we've moved on away from the internal controls as far as what is required under your BSA policy and procedure. Now we're moving into the control of your enterprise-wide training. So this is another pillar of your BSA compliance program foundation. So BSA training should be ongoing for awareness of developments and changing to BSA and related regulations. However, at a minimum, training should be completed at least annually. As I mentioned earlier, your BSA compliance officer will definitely be receiving more of that ongoing training. So they have an awareness of changes to the regulations, changes to the requirements, if there are any comments specific to proposed rulemaking from FinCEN or other regulatory agencies. But really, your BSA program should be a living and breathing program as far as training goes. So the BSA training program must also ensure that all board members and employees receive training specific to their roles and responsibilities to maintain an effective BSA program. So while not everyone has the same exposure to some of the BSA requirements, it is still important that everyone is aware of what those requirements are, where the oversight falls, where the responsibilities fall, so that they can help escalate any suspicious activities that they may notice and identify. And then lastly, training efforts should be documented and completion records retained to document that all of your board members, all of your employees have received their training requirement at least annual. The next compliance program pillar is what we consider to be the independent testing program. So under the BSA requirements, the credit union is required to complete an audit and validation of the BSA program controls. This should be conducted annually by an independent party. So typically, your credit union will engage with an external audit firm to complete this validation of controls, and the auditors should report those results directly to the board. So that's something to keep in mind the next time that your credit union's BSA audit is scheduled. And the credit union is responsible and required to track findings and recommendations noted. Those or any corrective actions that have been taken to correct any findings must also be tracked as well and periodically reported to the board so that you have an oversight of here's our BSA program's risk exposure, here's where we've had weaknesses. However, the credit union has implemented the following controls and changes to meet the requirements moving forward and to also address the auditor's recommendations. So I would definitely implement this process if it's not already implemented, to make sure that the BSA independent audit is reported to you directly from the auditors, and that periodically your internal audit team or your BSA compliance officer is periodically providing you with an update on if any recommendations are corrected as a result of that audit. The fifth pillar of compliance requirements is the Customer Due Diligence Program, or CDD program, and requirements. So we're going to quickly spend a little bit of time here because this is very important. The whole purpose of of Bank Secrecy Act is to make sure that we can identify who we are allowing to conduct transactions within the credit union space. So identifying the members and identifying the key players involved is definitely priority for your staff, your retail staff, your management team, your lending team, etc. So CDD include the policies and procedures that detail how the credit union will assign risk levels and develop risk profiles for its account holders. And this is based on either defined risk factors or anticipated activity. Many credit unions may utilize technology solutions to monitor and manage their BSA programs. An example of that would be Verifin, as an example. Verifin, or that type of technology solution, would analyze your members' transactional activities, and anything that is not baseline or anything that is suspicious to how they normally conduct business would be flagged and alerted back to your BSA operations staff so that they could then either elevate the risk level to monitor that account a little bit closer, or it's stable and we're going to keep it the same. So the CDD process, or due diligence process, should also include procedures for automated and manual ongoing monitoring for account holders. And the purpose of the monitoring is to identify and report that suspicious activity. So part of this process includes pulling cash transaction reports on a daily basis to identify those accounts that are aggregating more than $5,000, $10,000 in cash transactions, to identify if there's anything suspicious with wire transfers, if activity has increased for a specific account as far as withdrawals. So those processes and controls are operational requirements for your BSA staff or retail staff to complete. The due diligence process also identifies and updates the assessment of high-risk account holders. So some of those high-risk account holders can be gas stations, they can be convenience stores, corner stores, any business entities or individuals that may have a high frequency of cash transactions in and out of the credit union. That's who we want to identify and periodically update to make sure that the credit union is monitoring those accounts for any type of suspicious activity. And then lastly, there is a requirement for beneficial owners which have changed. So we'll go into that. So under the due diligence program, there is a risk rating and monitoring process. The information collected during the customer identification process or procedures at the time of account opening will be used to risk rate your member and business accounts. So that's identifying the purpose of the account, the source of the funds coming in and out of the account, the occupation or type of business, expected cash volumes, expected international activities. So at time of account opening, your retail staff will prompt those questions to do sort of a risk assessment on, okay, is this an account that we're going to flag as high risk, either within our core system, within the BSA technology solution that we're using, and how do we monitor it moving forward? So any accounts that are considered to be moderate to high risk, those, of course, should receive increased or enhanced monitoring for suspicious activities. So those are the accounts that we're probably going to turn on more alerts for. We may put a note in the core system so that retail staff knows to keep an eye open for anything that's suspicious. And of course, if the activity prompts a SAR or CTRs, those would be reported and filed with FinCEN. So we did mention beneficial owners. As of March 25th of this year, the requirement for beneficial owners actually changed. So previously, the beneficial ownership or anyone who owned 25% or more stake within a business, or anyone who had primary control over the operations within a business must they were required to complete a beneficial ownership form or information to submit to the credit union. As of March 25th, this has changed. So any entity that is registered to do business in the US is now exempt from this requirement to report their beneficial owners. So this actually reduced the numbers of entities required to report from approximately 32.5 million to 11,667. So the burden to the financial institutions have definitely decreased. Under the new requirement, only foreign entities that are registered to do business in the US are required to file their beneficial ownership information directly with FinCEN. FinCEN has made available a website to provide an opportunity for those foreign entities to complete that process. Foreign reporting companies are not required to report any beneficial owners that are US citizens or residents. And similarly, US persons, citizens or residents, are not required to provide beneficial ownership information with respect to any foreign reporting company that they are a beneficial owner. So again, this is a change that was meant to decrease the burden on the credit unions from having to collect, verify, and report that information. So it has definitely loosened the requirement to be specific just to foreign entities that may have business accounts with the credit union. So as we wrap up this section for the BSA compliance requirements, it is important that the board members and executive management are aware that if there are weaknesses to the program, weaknesses to any of the 5 pillars, there are regulatory enforcement actions that can be put in place to the credit union and or individual. So there are criminal penalties An individual employee or board member who willfully violates the Bank Secrecy Act is subject to a criminal fine up to $250,000 and/or 5 years in prison. Additionally, a financial institution that violates certain BSA provisions would face criminal money penalties up to the greater of $1 million or twice the value of the transaction. The website that was linked earlier in the slides will definitely identify those enforcement actions. But it is also important to note that civil penalties can be applied as well. So an individual can be removed from their position and prohibited from participating in any authority in the affairs of any insured depository institution. So again, those enforcement actions sometimes will note that due to the embezzlement, due to fraud, due to whatever criminal activity that employee committed, they can no longer sit or hold any office or position at a financial institution. So again, it is definitely important to take a look sometimes out at that website to look through some of the enforcement actions, because it can be a useful tool and resource to identify not only what the regulatory agencies are focusing on, but also what are some of these violations that the financial institutions have had weaknesses in, and how can the credit union avoid those. So to wrap up this specific part of the training today, again, there's 5 basic pillars that we wanted you to have an awareness of, since the oversight of these areas do ultimately fall to the board. Making sure that you have a designated BSA compliance officer, ensuring that there is a written BSA program to include policies, procedures, and all of the internal controls that we discussed, including the reporting requirements for the CTRs, SARs, and the 314A or B list. Ensuring that all members of your credit union, including your board team, your executive management team, and all staff, receive training on the BSA program. The BSA program can be the training program can be geared towards the responsibilities and the rules. However, it is important that everyone has an awareness of what these requirements are. Additionally, the 4th pillar would be your independent program testing. So that's the audit that's completed independently by the audit firm that your credit union decides to engage with. Please make sure that that report and the results of those reports are being presented directly from the auditor to the board. And then lastly, your CDD process, and making sure that your credit union not only has a process to identify and verify the identity of their members and businesses that they conduct business with, but there's also a due diligence process to continue to monitor those activities for anything that could be suspicious or high risk. So as I mentioned, weaknesses or lack of oversight within these 5 pillars can lead to violations and or penalties. So that is definitely important to keep in mind, and make sure that following this training, that you prompt your management team, you prompt your BSA compliance officer to go through these pillars, to go through these requirements, and make sure that everything is in place that should be in place. So at this time, we're going to take a little bit of a break, because that was a lot of compliance specific information. And once we come back from our break, Jennifer is going to pick back up with some of the BSA threats and some of the other related compliance areas that all of our board members should be aware of as it relates to the Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the presentation. And if anybody wants to come back at, let's see, 5:05, and we will resume at that time.
It'll be 11:05 for us, guys. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We are going to dive into the second half of our presentation this morning. So I hope you got all your wiggles out. For the second section of our presentation, we're going to go through some hot button topics, including regulatory updates for BSA, BSA trending threats, the identity theft program, and related consumer compliance regulations. So just as a reminder, if you have any questions about any of the topics that we are talking about today, please submit those through the chat so that we can get those answered for you. Kicking off with regulatory updates, recently, June 27th of this year, the FinCEN CIP TIN exemption order. The exemption allows for financial institutions to use an alternative collection method to obtain TIN information from a third-party source rather than the customer or member, provided all other CIP requirements for written procedures are met. So enables the financial institutions to obtain TIN information prior to opening an account based on the assessment of relevant risks and risk-based for the purpose of verifying the identity of each customer to the extent reasonable and practicable, enabling the financial institution to form a reasonable belief that it knows the true identity of each customer. The use of this exemption is optional, and financial institutions are not required to use an alternative collection method for TIN information. As mentioned previously in our first section, we're going to talk about some trending threats surrounding BSA, including cybercrime, real estate fraud, elder financial exploitation, and human trafficking and smuggling. Starting off with cybercrime, FinCEN reports the number of cybercrime-related BSA filings continue to grow year after year, specifically involving ransomware attacks and business email compromise attacks. So it's very important to be mindful when reading your emails, verifying who the senders are, and any requests, scanning those to see if anything seems out of the ordinary. Report suspicious activity to FinCEN, highlighting the presence of cyber event indicators such as suspicious email addresses, file names, hashes, domains, IP addresses, etc., in the SAR form. And it is critical to follow your incident response plan and notify other agencies of the event. Our next trending threat is real estate fraud. Fraud for property is one of them. This is when the borrower will overstate income or asset values to qualify for a loan, such as social security number fraud, identity theft, or loan documentation fraud. Another trending threat in real estate is fraud for profit. These are fraudulent methods that are used to acquire and dispose of property with inflated profits going to criminals behind the fraudulent transaction. This can include appraisal fraud, property flipping, misapplication of funds from construction or rehabilitation projects, and foreclosure rescue scams. Red flags to pay attention to may include undisclosed liens on collaterals. Our next trending threat is elder financial exploitation, also abbreviated as EFE. FinCEN released a report in April of 2024 reporting that 155,415 filings were made between June 2022 and June 2023 related to EFE. The filings were associated with more than $27 billion in reported suspicious activity. Digital payment methods and peer-to-peer transfer systems account for a significant portion of fraud committed. Ensure that there are e-commerce monitoring processes in place for suspicious activity. For example, unknown IP address accessing online accounts. Our next threat is human trafficking and smuggling. To avoid detection, human traffickers may use 4 different ways to launder money. They may use front companies, which can include massage businesses, escort services, bars, or restaurants. Exploitative, employment practices. Misleading employment offers often defraud victims recruited to work in the U.S. in the form of wage retention and deduction of so-called recruitment fees. Interstate funnel accounts. These are cash deposits that may be made under the threshold and are immediately withdrawn in another geographic area. To avoid detection, human traffickers may continue to use these additional ways to launder money. Alternative payment methods. These are traffickers accept payments via credit cards, prepaid cards, mobile payment applications, and virtual currency. Many times prepaid cards are used to purchase the virtual currency. It's vital that the credit union's suspicious activity monitoring processes and employees recognize behavioral indicators of human trafficking or smuggling, fraud, and money laundering. Next, we would like to talk about the identity theft program. With your identity theft program, written board approved programs should include red flag identification. This includes patterns, practices, or specific activities that could indicate identity theft. For example, alerts from consumer reporting agencies, suspicious documents, or just reviewing account activity. Should also include how the credit union will detect red flags. This will include procedures for detecting red flags in day-to-day operations. For example, verifying identities and how you're going to monitor transactions. Another component of the identity theft program should include how you will respond to red flags. So your program should clearly define how the institution will respond to detected red flags and to prevent and mitigate identity theft. Program updates. These should include a process for periodic updates to reflect changes in risk or operations. Your program should also include oversight and staff training. So the board or a designated committee member must oversee the program, and staff responsible for identity theft prevention must receive regular training. And as always, we recommend to document that training. Oversight of service providers. Contracts with third parties must require service providers to comply with the institution's identity theft policies or have their own comparable program. The board must ensure that management is in compliance with the identity theft program. You can do this through risk assessments, detection and monitoring procedures. So ensure that your institution has procedures for new accounts, the customer identification or member identification program, suspicious activity and monitoring, your incident response plan, there's training records available, vendor management and due diligence of those who have access to non-public information or NPI, and evidence of program monitoring and updates. Additional considerations are related consumer compliance regulations. So here we have a list of related BSA compliance regulations, including Reg B ECOA, which prohibits credits discrimination. Reg C, HMDA, or otherwise known as HMDA, requires mortgage data reporting. We have Reg E for the EFTA. This protects consumers in electronic funds transfers, inadequate error resolution practices. Reg Z, we have TILA or TILA. This ensures clear disclosure of loan terms. We have Reg DD, TISA or TISA, requires disclosure of deposit account terms. Reg CC is our funds availability and check holds policies. UDAP, this comes from the CFPB. This prohibits unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. And our privacy, GLBA Reg P, requires privacy notices and safeguarding of data. As board members, it's important to know how to maintain the oversight. And to do so, you can establish board-approved compliance framework and assign responsibility. Ensure compliance program policies and procedures are updated regularly. Ensure management provides compliance training to employees as appropriate based on roles and responsibilities. It's important to ensure that management is reporting to the board any audit tracking, including responses and corrective actions. Stay informed on regulatory changes and trends throughout the training, webinars, and engagement with any independent auditors. At this time, we'd just like to take a moment to highlight some key takeaways through our training today. First up, board of directors are required to ensure credit unions implement a strong and effective BSA program. Regular reporting on BSA reporting and monitoring activities should be provided to the board by a designated BSA officer. Policies and procedures should be written and documented to monitor, identify, investigate, and report any suspicious activity. It's important to understand the credit union's risk profile and risk tolerances when reviewing the BSA risk assessment. And lastly, all stakeholders at the credit union have a responsibility to follow appropriate member risk rating procedures and due diligence during account opening and transactional activities.
Thank you, Jen. So everyone, at this time, we did want to provide our direct contact information and also discuss how Buckley Technology Group can potentially help your board and your credit union with the BSA program. To mention Buckley Technology Group, we've been a business partner with the Hawaii Credit Union League for well over a decade now. So we support the Hawaii Credit Union within a few different compliance areas, specifically IT, cybersecurity, vendor management, as well as some of these other compliance areas, including Bank Secrecy Act, AML, risk assessments, and policy development. So one of the areas of oversight that I spoke about within the first section of the presentation was specific to the risk assessment piece. That definitely is an area where the NCUA has been focusing on within the past 12 to 18 months. I would recommend that the board members and management team do pull together to verify that your current risk assessment does meet the requirements of including not just your products and services that you offer, not just the geographical areas that you conduct business in, but also a trends analysis to pinpoint how the activities of the credit union has changed time over time. As I mentioned at Buckley Technology Group, we do our BSA risk assessment to identify changes over a 12-month period, where we're looking at those activities to identify if the credit union is filing more CTRs, if you're filing more SARs, that means that your risk exposure may be changing. So I would just recommend that everyone take some time to look at your BSA risk assessments, make sure that it meets those requirements, especially before your next exam is scheduled to begin at the credit union. But of course, if there are any questions, I definitely encourage you to reach out directly to us. We have a contact form available on our website, which is at buckleytechgroup.com. You can email us directly at info@buckleytechgroup, or you can call us and request to speak with either myself or Jen. We're definitely open to assist the credit union with any questions that you have. And as we mentioned previously, any questions submitted through chat, we are going to compile those questions, and then we are going to provide a Q&A answer response sheet to all of the attendees so that everyone has access to not just a quick answer, but also so that we can provide some resources and direct references and links to help you further with your BSA program. So I definitely appreciate your time. Jen and I, again, are grateful for the league for having us and hosting the event. And, we look forward to future communication to help with your programs.
All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Jennifer. Guys, if we can just show them a little love by giving them a hand reaction clap by using the reaction button, let them know that we greatly appreciate them today. Also, like she said, if you have a question, please put it in the chat. If you think of one, you can either email her or you can email Sayaka or myself. I put my contact information in the chat as well. If you think of one and want me to pass it over to Elizabeth before she compiles her report to give the answers back to you guys, please don't be afraid. Please we have the experts here in front of us. Please take advantage of that and ask questions as you see fit. If you don't have one right now, please email me. I'll get the question over to her. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sayaka. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. So after this webinar, we are going to be sending out a quiz and also your participation validation letter. If you have any questions, please let me know, and we'll see some of you tomorrow for our staff BSA training as well. Thank you. Bye, everyone.